And I fell in love with Salt Lake, so I thought, well, why don't we need to move out west? We've always been kind of, as you know, a little bit northeast centered, and but you know, brownstone's for everybody, so we decided to come out and test how things work in the West. And I think is it the West? You describe Salt Lake as the West? Yeah. The Inner Mountain West. Very nice, Leslie. Yeah. It's wonderful to be here. It's a beautiful city. I'm very excited and very happy to welcome you. We have one gala event a year. And last year, I guess, it was in Pittsburgh. Year before in Texas, year before that in Miami, year before that in West Hartford, Connecticut. So this would make our fifth. We were founded, Brownstone was founded in 2021 in the darkest of times. Those are all very dark times, as you well know. And I guess it was about 6 months after the Great Barrington Declaration, we realized that we needed a new institute to come to terms with what happened to us during those terrible years. And Lou and I, my co-founder who's in the back running all the audio here, thought a lot about our mission statement. And you know, what happened during that time is that all prevailing ideological systems kind of fell apart. Like nothing really explained what was happening. And we knew that coming out of this, there would be a tremendous need for new analytical tools to understand the world, understand pharmaceuticals, economics, education, everything, because everything was kind of dismantled. And we really do live in a different world now than we did 5 years ago. It's actually tremendously sad. I'm not sure how aware of it we really are, but I think it was about 2 weeks ago I went to Manhattan and got off at the Moynihan train station. Of course, I don't know if you've been to the Moynihan train station, you notice there are no benches anywhere. You can't sit down anywhere. Yeah. And the reason for that is if you put out a bench, somebody will, you know, make it their home immediately, you know. So you can't sit down anywhere, and there's no public restrooms, which creates problems in cities, to say the least. But I walked about 4 blocks to go to a meeting in a private club, and I walked through the most post-apocalyptic scene I'd ever witnessed. I mean, it was the trash, the debris, the fentanyl zombies walking everywhere, and I'm in this suit, feeling like people looked at me like I had come from another planet or something. You know, like, who's this weird guy from the 1890s who got dropped off? But anyway, we all know about the problems in our cities, whether it's San Francisco or Chicago or whatever. It's so sad, the brokenness of everything coming out of the pandemic period. Anyway, Brownstone was founded to rally around traditional principles of what built civilization in the first place. And the thought that we put into the mission statement really is drawn from F.A. Hayek, who said, look, what we're really going for is a world that minimizes the use of violence, coercion, compulsion, force, and maximizes the role of human choice and organic community. That's it. It's a very simple point. One I think that everybody would have agreed with just a few years ago. But if you look at the pandemic response, it was all about violence. Public and private, force, coercion, compulsion. They forced everything down our throats. They actually deployed the nightmare scenario of lockdowns, which I knew they had been planning for the previous 15 years, and suddenly it was here, under the claim that it was going to make like the virus was going to get scared of Fauci and move off to another planet or something. I don't know what the theory was. It turned out, we found out in time what the real theory was, which was that they were inventing a very quick vaccine that was going to fix everything. And that didn't fix everything. It made everything arguably, well, it didn't fix anything. Had no public health benefit whatsoever because it didn't stop transmission. And then the injuries started. Then the deaths started. And that was a terrifying moment that just did not anticipate. Anyway, we're living in the rubble. A whole generation denied education. They shut the schools, which is something I still cannot believe. I mean, the public schools were the great achievement of progressive ideology dating back 100 years. And then just overnight they said, oh, we're going to shut them down. Well, what are the kids going to do? Oh, they prefer Instagram and TikTok anyway. Let them get addicted to social media. I mean, you can't believe this actually happened. I feel like we have to rehearse these details on and on and on, because there's a weird thing going on right now, which is that everybody's pretending like this never happened. So just to go back in time, when I first started writing against the lockdowns and what was happening, people frequently called me a COVID denialist. Do you remember that term? Oh, you're a COVID denialist. Okay, so when I would make it clear I was not denying the existence of the virus, they'd say, oh, then you're probably a COVID minimizer. A minimizer. Well, am I a minimizer? I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking at the data. How about that? But anyway, here we are 5 years later. We've got a new kind of COVID denialism going on, which is a denialism that any of this ever happened. I mean, we've got lockdown denialism, stay-at-home orders denialism, plexiglass in front of the merchant denialism, one-way grocery aisle denialism, school closure denialism, and so on. They act as if it didn't happen. And I'm telling you, this is a serious problem for public life in America, where you have innumerable numbers of reporters who just don't want to face the facts of what's happening, that it all traces to the pandemic response and all the fallout from that, and the forced inoculations and the attempt to deploy mRNA technology where otherwise could not have ever gained FDA approval. Because they are not willing to face this, they're looking for some kind of scapegoat for why everything is collapsing. The pharmaceutical industry is no longer trusted. People don't trust the doctors. We've lost trust in, government, academia, science, the public schools. Our common spaces are falling apart. Can't even put a bench at a train station anymore. Everything is falling apart. Public trust is lost, and they cannot admit why. So the new problem we're faced with is that vast swaths of spooky institutions and reporters who are panicked about what's happening in the world today have decided that they figured out the real problem is brownstone. This is really true. And I'm very clear with reporters. It's not me. It's Leslie Manookian. She's the real... You know why people don't blame Leslie? Because she doesn't look like a villain. They blame me because I wear a cape. Yeah. No, the whole thing is crazy. Have you seen these charts made by one of these websites where it's got brownstone in the center, and then like 1,000 different lines pointing out to all these individuals around it, and then from there, basically every institution in America, right? So we're secretly running everything. The whole thing is great. It's like you can't believe this is happening. I'm in a state of disbelief about this. Yeah, I don't know. With my billions of Bitcoin, I'm paying off people. I don't know what the theory is, but this is really happening, and we're right now facing an incredible amount of pressure from every major reporter writing public health officials, people who work for them, people, members of this committee or that committee, wanting to know how often they're in touch with Brownstone Institute. Yeah, it's like McCarthyism doesn't quite describe it. And you know what's weird? They call us conspiracy theorists, right? But they have a conspiracy theory, which is that a guy in a bow tie and a cape is secretly masterminding the collapse of public health or whatever. I don't know what's going on. This is all a wild diversion. Just to be clear, this is an intellectual society. We're here for friendship. We're here for cross-pollination of ideas. One of the things you'll discover, well, you probably have already discovered it, there's a lot of different kinds of people here with a lot of different outlooks. We all have different intellectual backgrounds. You know, some people are in ag culture, some are economists, some are lawyers, some are medical doctors, some are scientists. Whether we came from the left or came from the right or what our influences are, none of that, it only matters in the sense that it gives us tools that we can bring to the table and talk to other people to help re-understand the world. And that's what we're really here to do. And that's why Brownstone has flourished, because we encourage this. We encourage friendship, community, and talking to each other. I have to say, despite all the calamity of everything that happened over the COVID period, these have been the most exciting intellectual years of my life. Because I left my little silo with my little friends and met new people with different outlooks on life. And it's given us, you know, at Brownstone, a really exciting mission, which is to forge a new understanding of life and society, of health, of agriculture, you name the topic, of law, with no limits, right? The old systems broke down. The old ways of thinking broke down. What are the new ways of thinking? That's really what we're all about. And it's been tremendously exciting. You know, every day as part of the Brownstone community, I'm discovering new things that I didn't know. My eye caught Laura Delano over there. I don't know if you read her book yet, called Unshrunk. But what a powerful, powerful personal statement about the role of psych drugs in our society. Okay, I didn't really know anything about that until I read her book. Now I'm realizing this is yet another way to understand the crisis in our civilization. Or, for that matter, it was only a few weeks ago, Brownstone was at a farm, where there are things like pigs. And what? Dirt. And there's dirt. Things grow. There are brown beasts variously roaming around eating things. Yeah, I mean, I think it was 20 years ago. I used to laugh at people. Oh, I'm going to the farmer's market. Why are you going to the farmer's market? That's stupid. Why don't I just go to the grocery store? Now you won't even find me in a grocery store. Yeah, I don't believe any of that stuff anymore. give me farm fresh food. So we've all changed. I've changed dramatically in my outlook, and we all have. And we've done it together. And it's a very exciting time, but it's also an obligation we have. And why? The big problem is that all the institutions failed. You remember this, right? All the people who should have spoken out and told the truth during those critical years, they went silent. And I get it. Well, I didn't understand it, but looking back at it, I get it now. The reason was they did not want to risk their careers. They got mortgages to pay, cell phone bills, you know, whatever, student debt. They had to get tenure. They didn't want to risk their tenure or whatever. So they just decided to let it go. And this happened initially, it'll pass. And there was a sense in the air, don't disagree. This has got to happen. These are just common sense public health measures, Fauci kept telling us, you know. Just wear your 3 masks and everything's going to be fine. And a lot of the legacy institutions just said, okay, we're just going to be quiet. It'll pass. Well, it didn't pass. It kept going on. But they kept being quiet. And then another year went by, and another year went by, and another year went by. And finally it became safe for them to come out from their little hiding places, they're hiding under their sofa from SARS-CoV-2, whatever was going on. By the way, do you ever want to do this when you see somebody with an N95 on and you want to stop the mask and why are you doing this? I finally did this. I was in the airport and a guy kind of cuts in front of me and I was a little annoyed and I said, hey, why are you wearing that mask? I've always wanted to ask this question. You know, I was a little bit shy, you know. And he said to me, it's because they're still having a pandemic. But that's the strangest. They're still having a pandemic, yeah. But anyway, these people were silent, and as a result, and now they've popped up again, and they're trying to go back to normal life. Oh, let's just talk about the things we used to talk about. Oh, just forget all that happened. You know, here's my new opinions, here's my new insights, here's our publication, here's our conferences, whatever, and they don't want to talk about it. Well, the problem is that it's not credible anymore. But we just don't believe. We're in a massive, paradigmatic, life-changing, life-shattering, once-in-a-lifetime, maybe once in a millennium kind of shift in public culture in this country, where all the legacy institutions are crumbled. They are. And I'm talking about the scientific establishments, the journals, which are thoroughly corrupt. We now know this. Academia, the agencies which are captured. We now know this. We were able to trace all the stuff. We didn't know this before. Now we know it. The intellectuals, the experts, they're all fading. They're all crumbled. I mean, it's a disaster. Fortunately, there are some institutions that popped up to tell the truth, to be honest and truthful about what happened to us, and look for ways to rebuild. And all these institutions are more or less new. Health Freedom Defense Fund, CHD, doing wonderful work, the Independent Medical Alliance, which is also here, many other institutions, and Brownstone is among them. But what can you say about the old think tanks, the old foundations, the old establishment? They just don't have voice anymore, and people are not listening anymore. That's the situation we're in right now. But to my mind, this is not a plot. Brownstone is not a conspiracy. We are a community of people who care. That's it. A lot of this came down to the courage that many people stood up and exercised. They gave up career to tell the truth, and they paid a very heavy price. You know, in 2020, the people that stuck their necks out and said this is wrong, they all suffered. All of them suffered. The signers of the Great Barrington Declaration. I mean, there were times when Jay Bhattacharya would go on campus and encounter wanted posters with his face on it, pasted on trees. Scott Atlas, who was such a great hero in that period, was censored was censured, I guess the word is, by the Stanford faculty. And that censure has not been withdrawn. Tom Harrington, you know, refused to be forced to take an untested potion and was forced out of his institution. Many academics were in this kind of situation. It was a tremendous loss. And you think about the number of students who were matriculating that were being forced to take a shot that they didn't want. They had to leave school and find something else to do. The institutions were purged of the non-compliant. That was part of the goal. And I'm convinced that the segregation of the cities between vaccinated and unvaccinated was also part of this purge. It was an attempt to say, if you're not complying, if you're an enemy of the state, you're not welcome. You can't even get a sandwich in this sandwich shop. And the New York Times loved it. They celebrated it. Horrible. And now Broadway complains that nobody wants to go to their shows anymore. You know? I'm sorry. I don't know what makes me more angry, but the collapse of the arts in this country is one of the more shocking things. Tanglewood, where, you know, I was living in Western Massachusetts, they shut down, canceled all performances for like 2 years so that people could stay safe. Give me a break. And what about the churches that went along, right? Close the doors on Easter and Christmas? And you expect anybody to take your message seriously after something like that? And how many bishops have apologized? None. The Vatican itself shut itself to the unvaccinated, wouldn't let them in. Can you imagine? I mean, where's that in Scripture where you can do that? You know? Unbelievable. Keep the lepers out, right? Well, my friends, you know all this, and I don't want to give a depressing talk. But look, we all know that the hell that's been visited upon us as a result of this response, and we know the reasons. And we're in the strange world in which people are unwilling to admit the real root of the problem. Speaking back about psych med use, the substance abuse in this country during the lockdown period just went through the roof. You know? I mean, unbelievable. I remember when telehealth came along, I thought, oh, this is great. Now I don't have to slog to the doctor's office and read People magazine or whatever. Now I can just dial up a thing. Well, that was to market the psych meds. Hi, doc, I'm not feeling very good. Well, have you tried Lexapro? Oh, sure, okay, great. So everybody gets on these psych meds. You can get them in 10 minutes, right? Just by dialing up a doctor, you get psych meds. Unbelievable. It was a horrible thing that happened. A whole generation lost educational opportunities, right? Anyway, I said I wasn't going to be depressing. We are rebuilding. We're rebuilding, but slowly and not quickly enough. All of our organizations are massively unfunded, underfunded. That's the way it's got to be. We do what we can with what we can. And early on, we set out and said, look, we cannot save the world. We cannot save everyone, but we can do what we can do. So I'm really thrilled to say that mostly what Brownstone has done over 4 years is supported fellowships for people who got canceled from journalism, from academia, from their laboratories, from the scientific establishment, from all sorts of places, and given them a bridge to rebuild their lives. That's mostly what Brownstone Fellowships have been about. I'll tell you a quick story. I was on the phone with one of these reporters. I don't know. I'm really starting to resent these reporters. Like, who do they think they are? They don't know anything. Plus, we have 3,000 articles on Brownstone, right? Why do you need to talk to me on the phone? Just read the articles, right? But they don't do this. They want to talk. But I can't, when I'm on the phone with them, I want to treat them as if they're serious people. So I said, look, if you have just a moment, let me lay out to you what my historical imagination and what drives me. She said, okay. I said, well, look, okay, here's the scenario. In 1930, Vienna was the world center of intellectual activity. There were circles of friends everywhere. Not people that agreed with each other on everything, but brilliant minds. And they were discussing philosophy and psychology and economics and law. And they met in coffee shops, and University of Vienna was flourishing. It was the world center, probably arguably in the history of civilization. The greatest minds on the planet Earth were gathered in one spot to try to figure things out. By 1934, all these circles were broken up because of the German invasion and the intolerance. Armies arrived with a new doctrine. They said, you have to believe this or you have to go. And they fled. And they had to have places to flee to. They went in the great intellectual diaspora that lasted from 1932 all the way to about 1936. They went to Geneva, they went to New York, they went to London because they found places to go. We live in a time where there aren't many places for these people to go because we didn't believe that we would ever need them because we all thought the world was working more or less, that we believed in free speech, free ideas, and we valued opinions. We didn't know there had been a cartel of doctrine that are gradually assembling underneath the surface that they would impose on the whole world and the intellectuals would be destroyed. So somebody had to step up. That's what Brownstone did. And I said, there's nothing more than that. And she says, there's a long pause and she says, so you're saying like Fauci's like Hitler? What I'm saying is that at all times and all places, it turns out there's always a danger that some despotic regime is going to show up and destroy the intellectual basis and foundation of civilization. And there needs to be institutions that provide sanctuary to keep it going. That's all. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Has her article appeared? No, her article has not appeared yet, but I'm sure it's going to be something like, insinuating that Fauci was Hitler. Tucker told a story of interwar Vienna. Yeah, it's probably going to be something like that. I don't know. I'll tell you something else that we've done since founding. It's been very exciting to me. I don't want to say it's been exciting. We started separate clubs. We started a separate club in West Hartford. Then it got bigger. Well, actually, the real problem was that we used to meet in our apartment, and the apartment got too small, so we moved to a restaurant, and then it grew, and it was 15 people, then there's 30, then there's 60, and now routinely 100 people, whatever. So then we expanded out, started a new separate club in Boston, and we've got one in Bloomington. Indiana? I get these states confused. Anyway, but I've always thought of it as like a side issue. I'm in this position of having to think all the time about what our next steps are institutionally, and these separate clubs just kept blowing up, and people from all over the country have been writing and saying, we want to start a separate club, and I've been, no, we just, it's too much work, and we're doing too much. And it was about 3 weeks ago, I was talking to Lou and Janet. By the way, Janet is the one who makes all this happen. Have you met Janet? Yeah. She's so great. And I said, I'm beginning to think that these separate clubs are a really important part of our operations, and we need to expand them. And that's true. And so we've started 2 new ones. We have one in Austin, Texas, and in Bandera, Texas. If I'm going to found a town in Texas, I want to call it Bandera. That's great. It's a great name. And we're ready to open some more. So Los Angeles, yeah. We're ready to go. How many can we accommodate? I don't know. We've got a scalable model. You have to do it this way where you don't have a lot of resources. You just have to build programs that are sort of self-sustaining, run themselves. But again, it's all about community. The real reason for the 6 feet of distance? They wanted to keep us apart. I mean, not to protect us against the virus, but to keep us from talking, to shatter our communities. So how do you fight back against that? You come back together around the table with friends. Get to know people again. That's how you defy the elites. Make friends, build community. And Brownstone has become that community. I'm very thrilled to say. People ask, thank you. You should just be on my end of things just one day to see the kind of nonsense I have to deal with. But, we're relatively poor compared to the bad guys, really. But people are always asking how we're funded. And my answer is always the same. We have 17,000 donors. And why do people donate? Because they care. Because they care. That's it. Because they believe that we can do something. That we don't have to accept our fate as a shattered, broken, drugged, depressed people. That we can come back, learn from the experience, and rebuild our society. That's it, 17,000 people. And then they start drilling down into the numbers. Yeah, but anyway, it's just so annoying. I mean, really, we have almost no resources compared to the people that locked us down and jabbed us with potions, right? So it's just like a joke. But we're struggling our way forward and very excited about the future. I made a list of 14 different institutions that are desperately in need of being reconstructed. And again, we can't do this. I'm just going to go through this list really quickly here. Here we go. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to read this real quickly and avoid. First of all, Pharmaceutical corruption. I mean, how did it come to be that pharmaceutical companies, the most powerful corporations in the history of humanity, making the East India Company look like a convenience store by comparison? I mean, it's unbelievable, the power of these institutions, what they've amassed. There's never been in the history of humanity a single industry that could push a button and shut down the societies in 194 countries pretty much at the same time. But that's really what happened. That has to be dealt with. Academic publishing. You talk about fakery, fake science that came out over 5 years. Unbelievable. We've all gotten a graduate education on how to discover fake science and how to read fake studies. It's incredible. And the retractions, yeah, a lot of them have been retracted, not enough of them. Right? 1 in 100,000, they all probably should be retracted. It's terrible. Agency capture, I've rethought what government is. I used to think government was some sort of exogenous institution to the rest of society. Now I realize most of these agencies are representing some industry. They're there to cartelize an industry. The Fed for the banks, the Housing and Urban Development for the real estate developers, the FDA for the pharmaceutical companies, and so on it goes. That's the essence of government. It's unbelievable. And RFK, God bless him, is trying to get rid of the problem of industry influence over agencies. He's barely begun the process. Everybody's mad at him for firing the old ACIP committee. The old ACIP committee, between all the committee members, owned 50 pharmaceutical patents. Have you ever watched some of the old meetings? I mean, these people would just they'd be asleep, you know? And then the CDC would present, well, here's some data showing a drug that's very safe and effective. We're ready for a vote. Oh, look at that. It's unanimous. What a shock. Unanimous agreement. That was the old ACIP. So Bobby fired them all on grounds of conflicts of interest. One reporter asked me, they said, did you watch the most recent ACIP committee meeting? I said, yeah. She said, well, what did you think about it? I said, it was amazing. They were debating, discussing, questioning data, debating amongst themselves. It was exciting. We got to see what science really looks like. Well, she was just appalled at this opinion. They regard it as chaos unless it's just codified. I'm talking too much on each of these points. Laboratory research. We can rebuild medicine. We can rebuild a lot of things. But what are we going to do about laboratory research? That's almost all captured. I don't know what we're going to do about this. This is a major problem. We don't have labs. We get nothing close to it. Medical insurance and services. I don't know about you, but I'm more and more convinced that the American system of medical delivery and insurance is in a fast state of collapse right now. Health insurance, outrageously expensive. We have the most unhealthy society on the planet Earth, and we spend more per capita than anybody else. And you're paying $27,000 on average to get services that mostly either you don't need or are hurting you. And I don't know what the future is for that. We're making some progress, a little bit at a time, but not enough. Media distribution. The legacy media, it's all fine to say, oh, nobody believes the media anymore. Yeah, they're enormously powerful, enormously powerful. Still, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all the legacy institutions are more or less still running things. And what do we have? We have podcasts and Substacks. Oh, there's some man in the back who's raising his hand. Oh, you're Yanya Kellick from Epoch Times. God bless Epoch Times, right? I mean, actual factual reporting. It's unbelievable. If you're not a subscriber, you need to get there immediately. And I say that not just because they let me, if you can believe it, write 6 articles a week, which is really true, unbelievable. But it's actually reliable news, real genuine reporting. And his wife, Cindy Drucker, back there, trains a lot of the journalists. And she told me once that when the journalists come to her She has to untrain them for what they learned in college, actually retrain them in being real reporters. I think it's the only newspaper in America, really. And it's a glorious venue. Thank you, Jan, for what you do. The problem of technocracy and social credit, we're going to be talking about that a lot this weekend, but I'm very concerned about, as we all should be, is this stoppable? The use of data to control us through surveillance? Looking back, all this contract tracing they were doing for SARS. By the way, are they still doing that? Last time I came back into the country, they're still tracing COVID? Yeah? This is all for a reason, right? We all know what the goal is. Universal global vaccine passports and digital surveillance and social credit, where they can turn your life on or off based on compliance with the regime. This is totalitarianism without armies. Very dangerous, and it's a grave threat, and that is not going away. Censorship, do you know that Brownstone stuff is taken down all the time, even now from LinkedIn, YouTube? Google's search algorithms are so gamed, it's absurd. Wikipedia is entirely captured, just filled with lies. The censorship is terrible right now. Yes, there are exceptions, X, but the United States today is the exception in the world. You see what's happening in the UK and in Western Europe. It's a calamity. It's a catastrophe. We've got to deal with this. The food production and distribution is a subject that I never imagined I would care so much about, but we've got to fix that, and it is fixable just by dealing with the USDA, meat processing regulations, these other kinds of things, refurbishing the family-owned farms, small farms. It can happen, and the Maha agenda is just fantastic on that front, but it's also going too slow. The problem of ideas, what I'm calling ideas production and teaching, with the collapse of the public school system, which is very much still ongoing, we have seen this developing network of private schools and homeschools. That's very exciting. But we have a problem that the universities are entirely corrupt, and yet they're sitting on huge endowments and legacy ideas that are not come to terms with what they did during COVID. All that has to be completely rebuilt. I'm very concerned about this. I have, as my 11th item, NGO and nonprofit corruption. Who can believe what happened? You know, it turned out a lot of what government did, it outsourced its most malicious and egregious agendas to NGOs that it was funding. That was going on for the last 5 years, and many nonprofits are deeply corrupt. I hope they would all be unfunded, but it's not happening because the foundations are still making a lot of money in the stock market, and they're still giving money to all the nonprofits, so they're thriving as never before. The brownstone is very rare. The arts, it's such a tragedy what happened to the arts, the live arts. Once that liturgy, the normal pattern of life, where you would go to the symphony, where you would go to the plays, where you would go to Broadway, whatever, once they shut that off, they couldn't turn it back on. And people are just not going back to the arts anymore. And that's not a good time for the future of civilization. Public life in the commons. Our common spaces are so in wreckage right now, and I'm sorry, you know, I love private clubs, I love private life, it's so great, but a society without shared spaces that are safe and clean. I mean, I was telling you about Manhattan. I never wanted to wear a mask during COVID, but boy, I sure wanted to wear a mask in Manhattan the other day. Whoo! I didn't know what the dominant smell was. It was some weird combination of weed, urine, and trash. I don't know. And depending on which way the wind was blowing, one would emerge as the dominant smell. Anyway, so yeah, I definitely wanted to wear an N95. If somebody asks me, I'm glad to tell them why. The final thing I'm very concerned about, and the Brownstones concerns itself with, is our economic situation. You know that during the pandemic period, we had an unprecedented rate of inflation. The Fed got busy, slammed interest rates down to zero, created, what, $6, $7, $8 trillion out of nowhere so that people could stay home and get their bank accounts flooded with cash from the government. I mean, why didn't people see there was something weird about this? Like, normally you pay the government and suddenly the government's paying you and you're richer than ever and yet you're not doing anything? Would people really believe that was sustainable? Well, of course, what happened over the subsequent 2 or 3 years is that the resulting inflation took away all the purchasing power of the new money that was given to you in stimulus. And massively distorted production structures. We've got an unthinkably high debt, and we might be right now headed to a second wave. If you look at the data right now, inflation just came in at 3%, and the Fed keeps lowering rates all the time, which means more quantitative easing. And my concern about this is that we could be moving into a period that looks very much like the 1970s. Right? We had one wave of inflation. Once that was calmed down, the Fed lowered rates, created a second wave. Once that calmed down, the Fed lowered rates, and then the end of the world, right? With 13% inflation and a massive disruption of the capital stock in America. Is that where we're headed? I sure hope not. Can we stand? We already lost 30% of the purchasing power of the dollar over the last 5 years. What's the second wave going to look like? And what's the third wave going to look like? This is a potential calamity. Anyway, I keep saying I'm not going to be depressing, but I keep being depressing. You know this guy, Steve Bannon? Very interesting guy. Not correct on everything, whatever, but he's very interesting. I was talking to him about this in private, and he said, Jeffrey, you're very good at highlighting the problems, but just remember this, what man has made, man can unmake. Who's in charge of history? It's not some impersonal forces, as Hegel would have it, right? Not some impenetrable power elite that nobody can control or see. No, it's people are in charge of history. It's our decisions, our actions, our belief structures. That's where the power is. I've seen it. And what's become of Brownstone? It started with nothing. There's this day when Lou and I were busy trying to come up with a name for what we would be, and my mother came to me and she said, I know the name. It's Brownstone. And that was this terrifying moment for me because I knew whatever she said I'd have to go along with. And I said, why Brownstone? She said, because that is a beautiful stone that was essential in the building of America in the first half of the 19th century. It made all the churches. It's an inexpensive stone, very durable, it's malleable. It made the churches, the civic centers, the apartment complexes. It's a beautiful stone. And what we have to do, and what this institution has to do, is rebuild. So it should be named after the stone that built America. So that's my mother. Now, my mom was a genius, keep in mind. I always tell Martin Kulldorff this story. I had scheduled to go to Texas to see her when the lockdowns happened. I said, Mom, I don't know, we got a virus. I don't want to give you a virus. She goes, don't worry about that. She said, here's the way it's going to happen. The virus is going to circulate around. Then we'll achieve herd immunity. And you'll probably get a natural immunity as a result of it. And then you can come see me, and I'll be protected, and everything will be fine. That's what, and that'll probably take about 6 weeks. That's what she said. So just come then. I told Martin Kulldorff the story. And he said, wow, she should have been made head of the CDC. That's very insightful. Yeah, she's a genius. Okay. Oh, wow, I've gone over my time. Let's invite up the next speakers. I want to thank you for coming and for being a supporter of ours and for keeping your spirits up and doing the right thing and working towards the rebuilding that my mother envisioned, that we all envisioned. Thank you so much for being here. All right, come on up. Come on up. You all mic'd up? Okay, good. Ronald Nass. All right. Come on. Deborah. And Leslie Manoukian. All right.
No, I think you were going to be there, but
okay. I am not going to do this like an annoying interviewer. I'm going to invite you to comment about anything that I said that you want to clarify or fix or just reflections. Meryl, go ahead.
You said the government is not an independent entity, but it's captured.
Yep.
I think we need to emphasize that. We don't have a government that works for the people. We have a government owned by lobbyists and industries. And I was just looking at the Gallup poll from early this month, which said that 15% of the population approves Congress, 5% Democrats, 33% of Republicans, 12% of independents approve Congress. So the agencies are captured, Congress is captured. We don't know where President Trump is getting his advice from. We have a government that doesn't work for us, and we don't know how to fix it. And that, I think, needs to be one of the primary discussions of this era. You know, we had a government that wrecked our economy, as you pointed out, during COVID, and it's wrecked our education system. It's bowed down to many industries, the agricultural industries, the pharmaceutical industries, the education industries. How do we get it back?
You know, Meryl, can I just say something real quick about that? You know, just as an outsider looking in, I have seen more progress in this administration than I've ever seen in any kind of political reform process in my lifetime. Like, Bobby's doing some great stuff, and Trump is doing some great stuff. Do you see some of that too?
I definitely do see it. I've written some of it down, but the peace administration, you know, is as warlike as any of the others, getting us into entanglements such as in Iran, assassinating so many, well, I would say colluding with the Israelis to assassinate in Qatar and in Iran. In the Ukraine war, which was supposed to be ended on day one, is still hot. And again, it seems that Trump is basically colluding with the Europeans to continue to try to somehow wrest control of Russia's economy through the Ukraine war. And it's not really hurting Russia, it's hurting us more and Europe more. But it seems that, to me, that the people who run Europe, the globalists, don't have any other way out but to continue this war of attrition against Russia that they're losing. So although, for instance, Trump has issued some really good executive orders, gold standard science, ending gain-of-function research, improving the voting system with paper ballots and getting rid of absentee ballots, except very limited ones, and claiming that Bobby will be allowed to run wild. In fact, Bobby's hands seem to be handcuffed, and he's been allowed to do very little so far. So, and he's not been allowed to get his own people into his agencies, and he has not been given any authority over EPA or USDA, which he had expected to have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Just to be clear, I think lay people on the outside think that when you're the head of an agency, you're in charge of the agency, right? That's what people believe, but that's not really true, is it?
No. Well, so you've got the, he had over 80,000 employees in HHS when he entered, and now supposedly has 60-something thousand. But the vast majority of them are Democrats. Over 90% of the population of Washington, D.C. is a Democrat. And most, unfortunately, I am a recovering Democrat. But the Democrats somehow have been led to believe that it is their goal and role in life to undermine this presidency and everybody in it. And the media, again, are trying to, they take even the good things that Trump and Bobby and others do and make them bad, because the goal seems to be that every single thing this administration does has to be thwarted.
Yeah. Leslie, do you have any you want to add to that? By the way, should I introduce the last time I had Polyface, people complained that there was all sorts of speakers that nobody knew anything about. So this is Dr. Meryl Nass, great physician and scientist who's been on the case of pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical corruption, probably more than any living person for longer, right? You've been doing this for
a long time.
A long time. So she's a world-class genius, and she knows everything. It's actually scary for me to even speak when she's in the audience, because I know that whatever I'm saying, she knows more about that subject than I do. And this is Leslie Manookian, her Health Freedom Defense Fund. You remember that glorious Emancipationist day when we could take off our masks because the federal judge said that's absurd. You can't have a central rule on clothing, you know, that's crazy. That was Leslie's lawsuit. She did that. So she never gets credit again. Her organization's tiny yet doing a huge amount of work. Deborah Saunders is
Sheldon.
Why do I say Sanders? Sheldon. Deborah Sheldon. The executive director, right? Vice President of Maha Institute, which is a kind of a sister organization of Brownstone for everything you're doing. So, and your work is very heavily involved in politics, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And reform. And this diminishing window of opportunity we have for federal reform.
Why do you say diminishing?
Well, I feel like we have all these expectations. Meryl, you said Bobby thought he had potentially some influence over EPA, USDA, HHS. Started out with 80,000, $1.7 trillion budget, shrunk down to 60,000. Then he had 270 political appointees, some of which he couldn't make. Now we're down to a really tiny number. But also the amount of time that we have to actually make reform is small, and everything we dismantle could be reconstructed. So it's a fairly mercurial space to work in, or to throw all your eggs in the basket of federal policy reform is foolish.
Does it feel as if the momentum is not with reform at this point? It seems like maybe a few months ago things were looking up, and now it seems like things have stalled. Is that just because the government shut down? By the way, what about this irony? 5 years ago, the government shut down society. Now, society shut down government. So I think this is good.
And no one cares.
Or nobody really cares.
Very few.
Yeah. Reporters always ask me, what do you think about the gutting of the CDC? Well, what did you expect after what they did?
Do you know, it's so interesting. I was interviewed by ProPublica for an article that they did on me. So one of the other things, in fact, the thing that I'm most proud of is something that happened this past year, which is that I wrote and got passed the Idaho Medical Freedom Act in April of this year. And this legislation is truly landmark. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world, let alone in this country. But it prohibits almost all medical mandates. No devices, no masks, no tests, no vaccines, no creams, pills, nothing. No medical interventions can be forced upon an individual by a public or a private entity in order for that person to engage in normal life. Nobody. ProPublica is freaking out about this, and they called me up. So I'm speaking to this woman.
Now, what is ProPublica? It's like a journalistic venue?
Yeah, it's actually huge on the left.
Oh, I see.
Okay, it's a huge publication for the most progressive of the progressives.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And, I mean, I have physician friends, or former physician friends, I should say, who that's their Bible. You know, it's the intellectual, progressive. Anyway, so this woman called me up and she said, so, you know, I'm really curious. I don't really understand. You don't have any faith in the government. You don't have any faith or trust in the media. And you don't have any faith or trust in corporations. I just don't understand. And I said, well, let me, you know, illuminate you for a minute. And so I shared with her a story that many of you have probably heard, that when I was working on Wall Street 25 years ago or so, I had the CEO of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, everybody knows the name of this company, come into my offices and tell me that their new drug that they had in phase 3 clinical trials, which is the last phase of clinical trials before they can apply to FDA for licensure, that this drug had very rarely killed a few people. It's very rare, they assured us. And then they said, the bad news is the FDA is going to make us put a black box warning on our packaging. The good news is we still think we can do $7 billion in peak sales. This drug is on the market today, friends. And so I shared the story with her. She didn't even flinch. Then I explained to her how we had been lied to by the government about masks, that CDC's own science showed in May of 2020 that masks have zero impact on the spread of influenza-like illnesses. They published that in May of 2020. I said this. I said they made up this whole distancing. There's a reason they made that up, because do you know, all of us are electrical beings, right? And our heart energy extends out about 6 feet. So when they make you stand separate, they are literally depriving you of your humanity, your ability to connect. And so when I would invite people over to my house during the lockdowns all the time, and they would come to my house and they would stand back. My own father did this. I was like, Dad, what are you doing? I went and hugged him. He was the only person that didn't cry when I hugged him. Every other person cried because it was the first time they had felt connected, that they felt human, loved, part of this world again, right? They did this deliberately. So I explained this to her. And then I said, the media, I mean, you guys lie about us constantly. You lie about everything. You expect us to trust you? So my point is that they are really in utter denial. But I take this as a very, very positive thing because, of course, there's that axiom, I forget who it's attributed to, that, you know, at first a new idea is resisted, you know, ferociously, or it's pilloried, then it's resisted, and we're in that phase, and then it's accepted as true. And so I personally believe that we are amidst the Great Reset, as Klaus Schwab wrote in July of 2020. But it's our Great Reset. It's our opportunity to take the tree that is falling and direct it into the right place. And the Idaho Medical Freedom Act is that. We can do this in every state. I'm sorry, the federal government, I mean, I have zero faith. But we can do it in our own states and in our local communities. And this, in fact, is the only place
there was a positive story about you and the Medical Freedom Act in Idaho in CNN.
That was the ProPublica article.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it got picked up. And
well,
then,
I thought it was a positive story.
It was. They think they're this is the irony, right? We are so utterly siloed. They thought that they were ridiculing me and our side. And everybody on our side is sharing it because, of course, I just decided, you know what? I'm not going to try and prevaricate with these people anymore. I'm not going to soft pedal it. I am going to hit her as hard as I possibly can with the absolute truth, which is that you and I, every single human being, by virtue of being born human, because of our Creator, we have inherent God-given rights, such as the right to choose and direct our own medical treatment. And no one should be able to intrude upon that. And she's aghast at that. She and her tribe believe that that's outrageous. But most human beings who think understand it. And so, yes, she tried to smear me, but I think it backfired massively. And the Washington Post is about to do it as well. But
are they really? Yeah.
But they're doing it under the guise, they're doing a long format investigation of Bobby and his successes or lack thereof. And I just decided, you know, I have literally refused to speak to anyone in the mainstream media for close to a decade.
But now you do it.
And now this is the second time I've done it. So I spoke with the Washington Post, and I know that this is coming out, and I just hit her hard again. She was trying to find out how bad I think Bobby's doing. And all I did was ridicule Congress and the federal government and the captured, you know, agencies and things. I mean, I think to what Meryl said, this is just so important. You talk to people around Bobby, and you will hear that they are just doing everything they can every day to thread the needle. How incredibly difficult it is. And that they have to work with these people in these agencies. And although the Trump administration, at least Trump himself, is talking very positively about exposing the truth about aluminum and vaccines and all these things, you're not getting that from the other agencies. You're not getting. The EPA is trying to fight the lawsuit that found that fluoride is a known neurotoxin and should not be in Florida in drinking water. They're fighting it
right now.
Yes. And so my point is, you look at USDA, they're actually doing, many of their efforts are undermining small farmers. They're not helping small organic farmers. So, I mean, you know, it seems to me that maybe there's a possibility that some of those who pull the reins of power are using MAHA in order to advance the second term, you know, the next, the midterms.
But basically, there's a huge misperception that somehow we are in charge. Right? And this is, I hear this all the time. Well, you guys are in charge now. Really? I don't know. We've got some high-profile positions, but that's not the same thing.
But we do at the federal level, but at the state level, that's where they're hearing us.
Yeah.
When I presented the bill, the legislators on our side were actually arguing on my behalf because everybody knows someone who was injured or killed by the shots.
Deborah, do you talk to the media?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, they definitely have signed up for all of our updates. They come to our events.
Yeah.
But again, we did with Marianne DeMasi and others who may be in this room, we had a roundtable a couple of weeks, last week actually in Washington, D.C. on the weaponization of science. And maybe 15 reporters showed up. And the story that they walked away with was Maha doubting the efficacy of statins. That was it. They didn't hear most of what we had presented. It's narrative control, as you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something earlier about, Jeffrey, you talked about, can you believe that they had our children, close the schools?
Yeah.
And you don't need to have our children in the schools to indoctrinate them any longer. You can do that in their own homes. And I think that's actually the erosion of parental rights and this kind of sense that, this sort of acculturation of the young people to externalize their authority, and of the parents as well to allow that to happen, and to buy into this as a sort of a freedom that they have at home is really the kind of imposter kind of creeping into the homes and actually, sort of taking the place of the mother and the father in the provision of sanctity in the home. So we don't actually need to be out there in the world to have our children sort of captured by their imaginations captured. And it seems like a minor point, but it's actually a major point because all of these tools that we're using on a day-to-day basis actually have the capacity to distance you from your loved ones in the privacy of your own home in a domestic setting where really what we need to do is connect in the heart space.
Yep.
And I was reminded of the Danish architect Jan Gehl, who when he decided what makes a good and beautiful public space, he's a Danish architect, he said there are two things that happen in good public spaces. It's a place where people can come. He looked at all the public squares throughout the world. It's a place where people can come and rest and look at one another and connect with one another. And that is truly what they did strip from us. And it is the thing that kind of keeps that impulse toward freedom or toward what is good and what is true alive, because we can connect with each other and have those discussions even if we're not saying a word.
Yeah.
I have a theory. So trying to figure out why 99% of my own medical profession performed so poorly during the pandemic, I've eventually concluded that life is too complicated, that no doctor can keep abreast of his or her field, that virtually no doctors know what the medical legal laws are, what they are required to, how they're required to perform legally. So they didn't know what could get them into legal trouble during the pandemic. And that basically we've got almost all of them now into a situation where they're dealing with imposter syndrome. They don't know enough. They don't have enough time. There's no way they can grasp what they need to know. And so they have to keep their mouths shut. They have to walk in lockstep. They have to obey the rules. And I think until we simplify life, we're not going to be able to solve that problem.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
There's another interesting aspect to this, and that is that I typically tend to think that 1913 was one of the worst years in American history because you had the Federal Tax Act, the 17th Amendment, which changed the way that our U.S. senators are selected from the state legislatures appointing them in order to represent the state's interests in D.C. to the popular vote, which basically meant that they weren't any different than Congress, than representatives.
Yeah, that abolished the bicameral Congress.
Yeah, exactly.
That the founders set up.
And so it just completely set up total capture of of Congress. And then on December 23rd, you had the Federal Reserve Act. Well, the 16th Amendment was the Federal Tax Act, which said that all of us can be taxed. But there was a loophole in there for the private foundations. And so what happened was Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, MacArthur, all of these guys started putting their money into these private foundations where they could grow it tax-free and basically shelter their wealth while the rest of us paid taxes. And they actually had an agenda, and most people don't know this, but in 1950, the early 1950s, I think it was in 1954, Congressman Carroll Reese held Reese Committee investigations. He held hearings in Congress into the activities of these these private foundations. And he appointed this attorney of impeccable repute named Norman Dodd. And Norman went and met with all of the different foundations, and they told him in private what their true objective was, which was to install collectivism in America. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we defeated utilitarianism in World War II, but the truth is it just suffered a setback. And so everything, like the doctors and all of our institutions, we were talking about this at dinner last night, what institution in this country, in fact, in Western civilization, do we have today that is not utterly corrupt and morally bankrupt? I can't think of a single one. That's staggering, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, and so we're in this place where people are like, okay, where do I put my faith? Where do I put my trust? And the Reese Committee hearings expose this, everything. It's just this utilitarianism is the ethic that is being pushed on our children everywhere. Think about it during COVID. Don't be a grandma killer. Don't be that guy. It's a small ask, wear a mask, right? All of these things. Yeah. And so I think that this is really what we're up against, and we need to shift this from this utilitarianism back to the primacy of the individual, because no society is healthy or just or free or good. We need to seek all that's good, and it's not good if we don't have individual importance.
And it's in our founding documents.
Yes.
And we have to get back to them.
Very much so.
Deborah?
I was just going to say, I think so much of the resentment that we're experiencing and the backlash is because we've somehow become the better storyteller by asking those basic questions. What is good? What is true? What is beautiful? All the transcendentals. We're kind of bringing that in, and we're also showing that we're willing to not just kind of reclaim those values, but we're willing to consecrate them.
Right.
And that we're doing that. Sure, there's a lot of focus now on the federal reform, but it's the quiet conversations that are happening in our schools and in our communities and the little towns across the country. And even on the flight over here, conversation that I had with the woman who was sitting next to me, who was, probably 10 years older than me, going to visit her son. We started talking about, thank you, Laura and Cooper, we started talking about psych meds. It was actually a really good entry point to our conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just do need to find those really simple, good questions.
I don't know if you've experienced this, but because there's no public discussion about what happened during this entire period, like the media doesn't want to talk about it, just pretend like it was just invisible. People are still desperate to tell their own stories of what happened in these years. And it's just, without fail, anytime I meet a new person, once we're 15, 20 minutes into the conversation where we're getting along well, I'll bring up, what I do and what I think about this thing. And they just can't wait to tell the stories. Well, this happened to my mother. They killed my grandmother. My daughter wanted to get married. It didn't happen. Whatever the story is, the suffering, the amount of suffering that people have experienced, and the desperate desire to share the stories. Yeah. This is a lot of what I think drives the Supper Club, is that people can come together and finally talk about, let's face it, it's trauma.
Yeah. Plus, we've been tribalized, and people need to find their tribe.
Yeah.
And that's what happens at the supper clubs.
Yeah. We have a kind of a new tribe developing that's pretty diverse. It's tribe without a doctor, tribe without a doctrine, right? Tribe of the traumatized, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I think on some level they're coming so much. We had lockdowns in Idaho, like most places, and I decided that instead of locking down, I would have 150 people over to my backyard. And so I did that several times. And I think I would speak, and these people were I would tell them what I really thought was happening, which is that I actually think there's a major financial explanation for what we've been going through, and that is that Europe is utterly bankrupt. If you look at their public pension liability, 3 years ago, it was already nearly 60 trillion. There's no way they're going to pay for that. 80% of people who are nearing retirement age are going to take a state pension. They've been using defined benefit, not defined contribution. And the biggest thing is that they went to negative interest rates for 8 years.
Right.
In Europe. Negative interest rates, meaning that if you put your money in the bank, you had to pay to hold it there. And what does that do? Well, it destroys the bond market, because people who buy bonds, they want to get an income. They don't want to pay. They don't want nothing for it, right? And so there was very few marginal buyers of the euro bonds. The ECB actually bought nearly 50% and still holds a huge portion of them. So they've destroyed their bond market, but they did something else, which is that they destroyed their pension market. Yeah. Pension funds need to earn 7 or 8% a year in order to service their liabilities. They can't do that anymore because they had zero or very, very low returns for 8 years. So they actually are in desperate need of an excuse, which is why I think they're agitating for war in Ukraine, why this is none of this makes sense unless you look at it through the lens of desperation of the political class to retain power once they actually default on all their debt and reset the system. That's what I really believe is happening.
Yes.
And COVID was one of the excuses for that. Where was I going with this? Oh, that what happened was that all these people couldn't make sense of this because it doesn't make sense unless you look at it through that proper lens, right? And so they would come to these meetings. They would come to my backyard parties, and they would feel affirmed because they sensed something wasn't right. They just didn't think that what was happening actually made sense, that it was reasonable, that it was acceptable, but they didn't know how to put it all together. And I think that's what they're seeking. They're seeking a little bit of affirmation that their own inner compass wasn't wrong. You know?
Yeah. You know, there's an article that appeared, I think maybe it was this morning or yesterday, and I'm going to say maybe it was the New York Times, about Florida as the new home of, did you see this article? Yeah. I think it was just this morning. New home for MAHA and, you know, World Without Mandates are doing what Idaho is doing, right? And they've basically adopted the same law.
It's amazing that people are saying, oh, Florida's going to be the first. And I'm like, wait.
Right. So is it weird? Does it concern you? Because, you know, I live in the Northeast. There are days where I think there is no hope for New England at this point. I mean, like the capital is leaving, the people are leaving, the vaccine mandates are intensifying in the Northeast.
And West Coast.
And West Coast too. And so all the energy, the capital, the freedom orientation is migrating now to Florida, to the Carolinas, to Idaho. I mean, how can you, it seems to be bifurcating more and more, not getting better.
So we don't have real votes, right? We have electronic voting machines. So we don't know, actually, what percentage of the people are disgusted with the way things are going.
Yeah.
You know, and until we have real paper ballots and videos and, you know, you can't move the ballots around, we're not going to know. Yeah. But I like to think that there are a lot of unhappy people. And when they stop getting their pensions or they start getting their pensions cut, which is definitely going to happen in Europe, hasn't happened here yet. I mean, you know, I'm on Social Security, and so inflation lowers our pensions, but people don't talk about that, and most people don't know about that. You know, things will change. I mean, they can't keep on. But I agree with you. This was an excuse to get a great reset, to get everybody on a digital ID, to get us tracked and surveilled everywhere we go. I mean, I pay cash when I go through a toll booth on the highway so that one thing doesn't track me, and I realize I'm going at night and they're taking a photograph of my license plate as I go through. I mean, you know, my phone is tracking me, my car is tracking me, my television is listening into what is being said in the room. And it's like, how many ways? So the government is against us. And I think we all have to, whatever the government is, we don't know who are the people who are really telling the government what to do. We know that DOJ collected all the information that the government had, and that's now in private hands if it wasn't already. It probably was. So getting a grip on that, being able to say, you know, out loud, the government is against the people. We don't know what the government's efforts are leading toward, but it seems to be incredible control over us, and that we shouldn't just talk about digital IDs. We shouldn't just talk about vaccine passports, which were the, you know, vaccine passports were the excuse for digital IDs. So the COVID infection was the excuse for the COVID vaccine, and the COVID vaccines were the excuse for the vaccine passports, and the vaccine passports were the excuse for the digital ID, and the digital ID was an excuse for total control. So we have to start saying that to people and wake up the other half. If they're really half, they're probably a third.
You know, on this question of ballots, I don't think it's well understood that it was the CDC that first moved on this strong recommendations for mail-in voting. And that was on March 12th, 2020. March 12th, 2020, they put an announcement out. Because of COVID, you should really not go to you should not go vote. You have to mail in your ballots, right? And we don't know the extent, or maybe we do, the extent to which that corrupted the elections. But that was the CDC on its own, just without asking anyone. Just said, all right, from now on we're going to have...
When almost nothing had happened.
Yeah, nothing happened. And they made a fundamental change in the voting protocols of this nation. If we don't have the vote, we don't have anything. We have no control over the regime under which we live without voting integrity. And the CDC just, on its own, with the stroke of a pen, just clicking, some intern or whatever, I don't know, typed on CDC. From now on, we're going to have mail-in. Everybody knows that this is the most insecure form of voting. This was outright fraud was being conducted right in front of us. It's unbelievable. From the CDC.
So go back to September of 2019 when, so there's something called the overnight window where big financial institutions park money overnight, and they can do it at almost the risk-free rate. And those overnight rates spiked to 10%. And the reason for that was because the U.S. banks didn't want to take on the counterparty risk of the European banks, in particular Deutsche and others, because they knew that they had, I forget it's like 675 trillion in derivatives exposure, some ridiculous number. And they knew that these banks were close to insolvent. And so I actually think that this was kind of one of the yellow flags, red flags, that we were on the precipice, and that those that run the world, the powers that be, had to do something desperate.
And about that, as far as we know, it was about that same time that the lab leak became known.
Well, that the lab leak story became known.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, really. I mean,
yeah.
I think it's more complicated than that, but my point is that there were things leading up to this. I mean, you look back in 2017, I think, in 2016, 17, 18, there was, do you remember popcorn lung?
Yeah.
What was popcorn lung? And then it all just went away.
Yeah.
Has there been something going on for much longer? And so, like, I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not sure either.
And there's evidence that there were cases way back before then. And so my point is that there was a serious financial, an existential crisis, and the Fed had to step in and become essentially the backstop for banks globally. That's what happened in September of 2019. And that was something that I think was like, okay, we have to do something.
And then October comes, and we have the military Olympics in Wuhan. Lots of people get sick. That was hushed up by the military brass. Nobody who got sick was allowed to talk about it. We went, 6 months went by, and SARS-CoV-2 was circulating all over North America, U.S., Canada, everywhere. People were just going about their business. And then, come whatever it was, February 27th, suddenly the announcement came from the New York Times. Everybody panic!
Yes.
Yeah.
So also in September of 2019, the Gates Foundation purchased $55 million of stock in BioNTech, which had never brought a product to market before. And it was their largest single investment that year. In October of 2019, the French government started the process to take hydroxychloroquine off the market as an over-the-counter drug and make it require a prescription. And that process got completed in January of 2020. Also, a lot of the stockpile of hydroxychloroquine in France disappeared at that time. So clearly, things were planned ahead of time. Catherine Austin-Fitz says that they were sloppy in the rollout in January, but then they started to pull it together. In January and February of 2020, CDC insisted on pushing out a test that they knew didn't really work, a PCR test that they had developed, and didn't let anyone else use any tests that they might have or buy them from other countries, which might have better ones. And basically by allowing only a very small number, like 1,000 people to be tested for COVID in those first 2 months, allowed the disease to spread widely through the U.S. And looking back, I think the only reason that makes sense for CDC to have behaved that way was in order to spread the disease more. Finally, FDA was so fed up with them, FDA sent their own people to investigate what was wrong at CDC and then took it over and in the early March said, okay, we're going to have a new process for rolling out tests for COVID. And then that process still took too long. And then around March 15th, FDA said, look, anybody who's developed a test, start using it. Start rolling it out. Give us the paperwork later. We'll go through it. And then FDA went on this mad dash and approved 325 tests, almost all of them PCRs, for COVID in March, April, and the succeeding months.
Yeah, that was a very strange period because there was disease panic in the air. Everybody was worried, do I have COVID? You had no way to find out. And even more importantly, you had no idea what to do if you had it, right? It's like, so what?
Wait until your lips turn blue.
Yeah, right.
Stay home.
Yeah, stay home. Stay home. Well, I want to thank all three of you. These are incredible experts. We're so thrilled to have them here with us. And I know we haven't allowed a Q&A. We probably should do some of that while we're here, but they're available to you this whole weekend. And, oh, there's our first. Jessica, you have your hand up in the back? We can't hear you. When Jessica Rose wants to say something, she's allowed to say something.
No, it's not on.
Go ahead, Jess.
So, just as a point of getting the ball rolling on a conversation for people who might still be kind of in the let's get on with life phase, I think they're going to do this again. So when this whole thing started, like in this time frame that you were just speaking about, Meryl, the first thing that came to my mind was if we have a good antibody test to detect whether or not you have established, immunity, the whole thing wouldn't have happened. And that's one of the points that made me realize, this is a big scam. Like, why are they doing PCR? Like, with, CTs of 45. That's so dumb. All they need to do is, come up with a decent antibody test. I would have taken it. Why not? Yeah, I'm immune. Here, give me my certificates.
But you remember in this period, Jay Bhattacharya did the seroprevalence tests in Santa Clara, remember? And he came out with a study and something like
4%, I think.
It was like 5%.
It was 4 or 5% already in April of 2020.
Where there was no COVID.
Where there was supposedly no COVID.
Yeah. And so we already had we had widespread. What it showed is that the infection fatality rate was far lower than the WHO was saying. They were saying it was like 3 or 4%. It's just absurd. And I don't know how many of you listened to my interview that I did with the gentleman who's been tracking the South Dakota study from Sanford. They did a seroprevalence test. They started conducting seroprevalence tests in South Dakota and among their own staff, and they had like 10,000 people that were tested. And they cut it off once the vaccine was released. They cut off the study. But the study was withheld for like 3 years, and then it finally came out, and it proved that by November of 2020, there were already seroprevalence levels of 55%. You understand what that means, right? We were already there. In other words, this product that they were trying to sell us and then eventually mandated, if seroprevalence tests had been advertised, it would have proved it was, forget safe and effective, it was never necessary. You see? And they withheld the study. Didn't publish it for 2 or 3 years.
But Jeffrey, this has been the playbook of the vaccine industry for decades. You look at just what they do with flu. They hype flu. Oh my gosh, there's not enough vaccines in order to drive demand and make you think that it's scarce, and then people will go and get it. And it's all based on a ruse. I mean, they have actually never been able to prove that flu is even contagious. And they've also, I mean, there were Rosenauer studies done by the Public Health Service in 1918, 1919. They could not make it contagious. And then there's also more recent research showing that that it's correlated to your vitamin D levels. So I wonder if what we call influenza-like illness isn't actually vitamin D deficiency.
This is what Ryan Coles here says.
Scurvy and rickets are C and D, right? And so my point is, they are using fear, manipulating the public. This has been going on for decades in order to sell their products.
Okay, let's thank our panelists and see you back in 20 minutes. Okay, we're ready to go with our next panel. I wish I had a bell. I know. All right, we're ready to go. Scott Jensen from Missouri. Hey, have a seat. All right, Scott. You guys have plenty prepared?
I have nothing prepared.
I have something prepared. I have something that will draw Marianne into the conversation.
Okay, good. All right, we've got till 11:30, so that's good. Wow, that's a lot of time.
Is that your water there to the left?
Okay, let's have a seat. Get going here.
Let's just.
I'm going to open it in advance because if you don't,
Where's Shani? Do you see Shani? What? Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. All right, let's get going.
It was nice that we ran.
All right, for our next panel, we've got, so I'm going to get better about introducing our guests. So very honored here to have Scott Jensen and Marianne DeMasi. Just a quick story about Scott Jensen. During these years, we've been, all of us kind of separated from each other. And a big struggle that I've had is getting to know, who has been active and who's been doing what. And years went by, and I didn't realize that Scott Jensen had been running for governor in Missouri, right?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Why do I always get that wrong? Minnesota.
Always.
It's the second time I've made this mistake.
Well, they both have double consonants.
Okay, Minnesota. Which is also where this Tim Walz is from, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So he's the governor there. Scott Jensen ran for, well, let me just back up. He's a medical doctor who, when the COVID thing started happening, he said, well, this is intolerable. And so now I'm going to have to throw myself into politics. So he ran for governor. But immediately, and with all the right points about vaccine mandates and masking and, the separation thing, just 100% great, should have won. But he was shut down by all of social media, completely shut down. Your Facebook account was deleted, everything. Zuckerberg plotted against you. I don't know if you even had access to Twitter, but it was a miracle that you got anything done at all. And then you had to deal with mail-in ballots at the same time, right? So, but even then, you barely lost, right? I mean, you almost won. So you got the nomination, then you almost beat Walz. And now you're running again on a very similar outlook, hopefully this time without as much censorship. But the incredible thing to me is that I, of all people, should have known about you, and I didn't know about you until I think Eric Curiotti told me about you, right? I mean, I'm so embarrassed that I didn't know about this, and then I invited you to a retreat. I'm thrilled. Sitting next to him is Marianne DeMasi. Do you know Marianne? How many people know Marianne? Okay, she's globally famous now, and you live in, am I right? Adelaide?
Adelaide.
Adelaide. She lives in Adelaide. which means that her time and her seasons are upside down from everybody else's.
No, yours are upside down.
Well said. Now I'm going to say he has an accent.
She's the most reliable pharmaceutical journalist, I would say, on the planet Earth today. You know, unfailingly accurate and on point. And on numerous times over the last 2 years, I know for sure, because I kind of follow her schedule, there'll be a breaking story. She stays up all night, cranks out the story, and it rocks the world. It's happened again and again and again. I mean, like the most reliable, truth-telling journalist on your beat on the planet Earth. Very proud to say she's a Brownstone Fellow, which doesn't mean that how often have I told you what to write?
Never.
There you go.
Never.
Okay. So tell that to Politico. Or it's the New York Times, which I'm sure. But it's been remarkable. You ever doubt the power of ideas? This one woman and her writing has really, in many ways, changed the world. She sets the agenda. She's just been amazing. Outclassing and outrunning the whole of the New York Times. She's just been fantastic. The Epoch Times often reprints her, and so it's just been glorious. So you've already heard a lot of the things we've talked about today. Scott, I'm just going to open it up to you because I think you have a lot of comments. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Listening to the first talks this morning, I just took a few notes, and this is what I came up with, listening to Jeffrey's talk and then hearing the interviewers. I think what we've seen is this public health domino effect, and out of it has come a new crusade. And I think that's why I'm thrilled to be up here with Marianne, because at some level, you are a crusader.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the Crusaders were pretty bloody,
right.
And they lasted a long time. So here's what happened, and this starts with Jeffrey's comments this morning. Why did some of the people we expected to stop the madness over the last 5 years, why did they not? Where were they? Jeffrey mentioned that careers were at stake, certainly cash in terms of what your income was. If you're a researcher, where are you going to get the funds for your next project? Credibility was a big deal as well. That held people back. They didn't want to lose credibility, particularly in the community. And then I think Dr. Nass mentioned things are complicated. So I think those four things, their impact, careers, cash, credibility, complicated, led to courage being crushed. And that led to conspiracies, and conspiracy being created and condemned. And it was, you saw it across the board. It was remarkable how the timing was synchronous. You could see it on CNN, you'd see it here. It was almost as if someone had given news an edict and said, say it over and over again for the next 36 hours. This is the news cycle of the day. And that caused compliance to become the Holy Grail, and a crusade was born. And I really think that that's what we're dealing with. And so now the question is, are we going to have crusades last a couple hundred years? Is it going to cost us our democratic republic? Or is there something we can do to start bringing people together, start getting people to listen to people that they haven't been listening, finding their news in sources that they haven't been finding? And to me, that's what you've been doing, Marianne, is you've been saying, I'm not going to let you shut my voice down. I think I have something to say. I know that without meaning to single out any one person in the audience here, I do find your writings oftentimes very similar to Ed Dowd. And I know Mr. Dowd's going to be talking, but he's taking things that are sort of a different angle. And he's making people let go of just the rant, let go of just the hard part. And Ed's saying, well, can you look at it from this angle? And you're saying the same.
I think with my work, I feel like I've stayed the course. I've stuck to the data, and I do my job as a journalist to question authority, hold the government's feet to the fire. And it's the rest of the mainstream media that has gone off course. So I kind of feel like I've stayed true to the principles that I learned when I first started in journalism. It's about transparency and critical thinking. And it's just unfortunate to see the way the media has turned into a propaganda machine for the government, and that was particularly obvious with COVID. But I had noticed that in the years before COVID, I was working in mainstream media for quite a few years, and it was only until I started questioning the pharmaceutical industry that I ran into trouble.
And you were, am I right? You were a stringer for the British Medical Journal? Am I saying that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did investigations for the British Medical Journal.
Yeah.
And for a few years we interrogated regulatory capture, the oversight of clinical trials, and conflicts of interest. That was my main focus.
Right, until they were no longer interested in those subjects.
Right. So, the BMJ took a certain position during COVID, and
yeah.
I think one of the most important things, because I know we had been asked if we'd speak to the issues of public health in our panel, I think one of the most important things that came out of the whole issue of statins is the undermining of informed consent. And I think it sort of was insidious. And you tried to bring some light to that. I remember when I first, as a practicing family physician, became aware of the fact that there was an increasing number of people that were developing, first, elevated glucose, and second, an actual diagnosis of diabetes while on the statin drug. I thought, well, why isn't this out there? And the number of physicians that put patients on statin drugs and never mention the very real issue of hyperglycemia and subsequent diabetes diagnosis is the great majority. So at some level, there's no way in the world that patient could have received informed consent because they weren't informed. The number of patients now that have just been emerging over the last couple of years where they've taken a break from a statin drug and found that the mental fogginess they've been living with dissipated, and they said, I can't believe how good I feel. I mean, that's an impact. How in the world can you provide informed consent if you're not telling people that?
When I was thinking about public health, statins are probably one of the most important public health drugs because they're given to virtually everybody over the age of 50, according to the prescribing guidelines. And I think the problem with public health is that it's full of slogans and sweeping statements about how it's trying to make the population healthier. I mean, its role is to make population-wide decisions to improve the health of the public and extend their lifespan. And statins are an interesting example of where the vast majority of people that are taking statins are in the lower risk category. So the data is very clear from many independent research groups that people at low risk of cardiovascular disease, which is about 75% of people that are on statins, may get a cardiovascular benefit. But what becomes clear in the clinical trials is that overall, these people don't live longer. So you've got to start thinking, what's happening here? If they're having less cardiovascular events, what's cancelling those benefits out so that this population ends up having the same rate of death as the people who weren't on statins? So this is the problem with public health. They kind of give with one hand and then they take with another. The problem with statins is, as Scott's mentioned, that statins also increase your blood sugar levels and they increase your risk of developing diabetes. They give people muscle aches and pains, which means that they don't exercise as much. And then when you realize that physical activity is an important risk factor in reducing your cardiovascular risk, when you're developing all these other life-shortening conditions, that means that you taking a statin doesn't live any longer than the person not taking a statin. That's the problem with public health. They make these sweeping statements. They say statins will save your life, but they don't consider all of the collateral damage that happens regarding these interventions. And I actually wrote about this recently with routine mammography screening. That's another example of where the establishment will say routine mammography screening for everybody over the age of 50 or all women over the age of 50 saves lives. and it's pretty compelling, and it's so intuitive too, that if you catch cancer early, you will save lives. And so it's a really powerful slogan. But what routine screening does when you're screening everybody is that it's such a sensitive technique. Apart from the fact that you may be causing harm with extra X-rays and radiation, you're also picking up abnormalities in breast tissue that might never have caused these women any harm. And so you have a situation where the doctors will see an abnormality, they're compelled to treat it, and these women go down that path of having chemotherapy, radiotherapy, lumpectomies, mastectomies in some circumstances. Women are having double mastectomies just to rid their mind of the possibility that perhaps these abnormalities might turn into cancer one day. But these are all unnecessary treatments, and you find that the evidence is clear with routine mammography screening. I'm not saying individual case-by-case basis, but screening an entire population means that you end up harming more women by exposing them to treatments and surgeries that for abnormalities that would never have caused them a problem. And that's a classic example of how public health
well, you're both speaking to what I consider the single most alarming thing that I've learned over 5 years, which is that a lot of our public health problems actually trace to the so-called solutions themselves. Yeah. Like, in other words, they're iatrogenic, which is to say imposed by the medical system itself, and at a profit. So, and I had a very prominent, important doctor, thinker, say something to me the other day. He said, the most important job for Brownstone is to figure out how we can create a system where people profit from actually making people healthy rather than profit from making them sicker. That's a very profound, right? It's a profound question.
That's an excellent point, Jeffrey. And it's interesting that I think Marianne's taking sort of a charitable 30,000-foot view on mammograms. But if you don't mind me as a family doctor in the trenches getting a little dirty about this, why? Why are we seeing this happen? Why are we seeing this supposed best thing since sliced bread screening test, mammography, not reduce all-cause mortality? Well, there's several things, and it would be interesting at some point in time during the conference to have Dr. Ryan Cole speak to this issue. But first off, mammography compliance rates go up dramatically as soon as a clinic or a hospital buys a new machine. Secondly, it's the truth. I remember working for a clinic, and we used to have somewhere around 65% getting it. Once we got a machine and we were told that this would end up on the bottom line, we went up to 95%. But in the world of dollars in healthcare, you're always looking for recurring income, and mammogram is perfect. But there's another piece, and that piece is you're always in fear of being called on the carpet or malpractice. And if you look at why we're so befuddled as to how to treat prostate cancer in men, it's because histologically, it's very difficult to make an absolute demarcation between is this cancer or is this not? So what is someone who studies cells, a pathologist, going to lean toward? You're going to overcall. If Jeffrey comes in and he injured his wrist and I do an x-ray and I see a shadow on a bone, I'm way better off telling him, gee, Jeffrey, you've got a slight non-displaced fracture. It's going to heal in 6 weeks. Oh, gee, well, that's too bad. No, it's going to be okay. You don't have to have surgery. We're going to splint it. And if it does really well, we'll let you take the splint off in 10 days. Not 6 weeks, 10 days. It's way better for me to overcall the fracture than tell him, you know what, I don't see a fracture here. Go on your merry way. 10 days later, once there's been an opportunity for a little more bone to dissolve, a repeat x-ray frequently will show the x-ray. I'm way better off the first time around. Call it a fracture. He'll be happy when he heals faster than he thought, and we're all good for the day. But if I don't do that, 10 days later he sees someone else, and x-ray's repeated. Good grief, Jensen missed the fracture, that idiot. I don't like the situation that evolves from that. We're seeing the same thing with pathologists. Pathologists are going to overcall tissues because the last thing they want to do is say, there's no cancer here. I see it all the time in my surgical practice where I take melanomas, basal cells, and squamous cells off. We used to always, when we got a report back and it says, this is a positive basal cell cancer or this is a squamous cell cancer, we would put the patient through another procedure, re-excise it, get bigger margins until we got a report from the pathologist that it was all clear. What happened was on the second surgery, all of them were coming all clear. And they couldn't find any cancer cells in the second reading. So what a lot of us have quit doing is the second procedure, telling the patient, listen, basal cells and squamous cells only recur where they originally were at anyway, so let's just keep an eye on it. What's happening is we're getting reports from pathologists. They're saying, I can't tell for absolute certain, so I'm just going to say one margin might have been involved. That changes the whole game for me. That means now I've got a patient with potential for recurrence. This is the kind of thing that's happening in mammograms as well, and this is why you mentioned, Miriam. Oftentimes something is being read as cancerous when it isn't black and white. Mm-hmm. These kinds of things, it's sort of like if you see a lung nodule. Jeffrey, you come in with a cough. And I say, oh, good news, no pneumonia. But there's a little shadow, there's a little spot, a little nodule about the size of your fingernail. And you say, what should we do about it? Well, we don't want to go digging around in your lungs. So what we'll do is we'll follow the Fleischner protocol. And that calls for a CAT scan at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, or something like that. But all of a sudden, 5 CAT scans. That's called recurring income. What would be the best way to solve that problem? Say, okay, we're going to do the 5 CAT scans, regardless of the radiation. But every one of the CAT scans gets reduced to 50%. So the first one you get paid your $500. The next one you get $250, $125, $65, and then you get down to $32. And the radiologist saying, do I really want to be doing my CAT scans for $32? They're going to rethink the whole thing because there's no way Jeffrey is going to be able to tell a radiologist what the proper follow-up would be. But if we make the radiologist think through this differently, now we've got a chance that we're cooking with real gas.
I did this documentary once called Too Much Medicine, and I explored the issue of mammograms. And when I interviewed a few oncologists about this issue, they explained that about a quarter of the abnormalities that you find on a mammogram are called ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS. It's actually not cancer, but the name ductal carcinoma in situ kind of sounds scary, and they even call it stage 0 cancer. So when you tell a patient you have stage 0 cancer, many people are going to feel like, well, I don't want to take the risk. I want to eliminate it, do whatever it takes. And that's where a lot of women aren't being given informed consent before they go down this path. And so the point of this program was how important it is to talk to people, talk to the patient about, if I do this test, it could come out, this result or that result, how far are you prepared to go? And are you willing, if you get DCIS, which is stage 0 cancer, is that something that you want to treat with serious radical surgeries and radiation therapy? Or is it something that you think you could be okay with just monitoring? And so I've noticed in the last decade, they're trying to give women the option of active surveillance to just monitor the issue and see that it either resolves itself or it progresses into an actual cancer. But it's a good way of sparing women the unnecessary treatments for abnormalities that would never have caused them harm. And of course, the PSA test for prostate cancer is a very similar situation. Most doctors will just give men a PSA test, without even asking them. They'll just do the test, and then it comes and says, well, your PSA antigen is slightly elevated. Then the whole investigation starts. Whereas Vinay Prasad talks about this quite a lot with prostate cancer detection, in like screening all men over a certain age. perhaps we should have that conversation with people before we do the test to let them know, well, if it comes back elevated, it might mean nothing at all. If it does show that there's an abnormality, we'll do a biopsy, and then we're not going to be sure if it's aggressive or not. They have the Gleason score, I think, can give them a range. But it allows them to think through the process rather than jumping on this conveyor belt and then getting swept away with all of the treatments that they'll have to confront down that path.
All rooted in disease fear, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the problem with public health, is that it's constantly sending you messages of, you're going to die of cancer, or you're going to die of heart disease if you don't take
You're going to die of
supplements.
COVID. And actually, Scott, going back to your opening comments about, I think you listed 5 factors that led to the mass compliance or whatever. One of the things you didn't mention was just ignorance. I mean, there's a great deal of public ignorance out there today that wasn't there when my mother was a young woman. She was taught the principles of viruses and immunology and things like this in her middle school, And we've got a whole generation now that didn't, for example, know anything about natural immunity. That we don't live in the microbial kingdom. The microbial kingdom's the enemy that you could just have to keep at bay. There's no health through exposure. The only way to get over anything that you happen to get is if some medical establishment invents a potion that you inject, right? This is widely believed, actually.
And I think one of the powers of a conference like this is when I was first running for the Senate and I was elected in the same year Trump was elected in 2016, I was given the advice, 3 words: influence the influencers. And that's why I think a lot of us are here, because we're not here just to rant and share collective anger. We're here to be literally a springboard for information going forward. And Marianne, you used the word or phrase conveyor belt. Just imagine yourself going to the airport and looking for your luggage, and you thought it was going to come out in carousel 5, but it was over at carousel 9. You could sit there all day long and you never get your luggage. You're on the wrong conveyor belt. We do that all the time in medicine. We're on the wrong conveyor belt, but we're always in search of the best conveyor belt. So we talk about PSAs with prostate cancer. Well, before we had PSAs, we had acid phosphatase levels, and we frequently chase the wrong value. It's called a false surrogate. And we do that, and we've done that with cholesterol over and over again. We said the holy grail for cholesterol is, what's your total cholesterol? Lower it down. And then we found, well, that's not really true, because it's the LDL. No, it's the triglycerides. No, it's the HDL. If the HDL is high enough, nothing else matters. We're chasing the wrong surrogate. The people that have the lowest cholesterol in my practice, consistently, are the ones dying of cancer. Cancer really likes to chew on cholesterol molecules all day long. So today what we have is we've actually seen Big Pharma convince physicians to just throw all the surrogates out when it comes to cholesterol profiles and just go for the highest dose. And so they talk about moderate intensity level or high intensity levels. I have patients that come in and they say, I'm supposed to get my cholesterol less than 200 because the cardiologist told me so. And so we talk about it, and they decide they want to try some rosuvastatin. And I said, well, rather than start the standard dose, why don't we just start a baby dose? Because a lot of times, if people take a half of a tablet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they get a tremendous response. And a lot of times, we look at the numbers, and boom, the cholesterol went from 220 down to 175, and the LDL dropped. Well, I tell the patient when they come in for follow-up, great job. Combining, maybe you're running or walking, watching your diet a little bit more. You're taking a half a tablet 3 days a week, which is 1/10 of what most people are taking, and you're having no side effects. This is great. Goes back to the cardiologist. Cardiologist jacks them up from 5 milligrams on 3 days of the week to 40 milligrams every day. Comes in to see me because you couldn't get a chance to see a cardiologist, talk to a cardiologist without an appointment. Hell would freeze over first. And so they talk to me, and they say, what should I do? I feel miserable. I said, well, I had you feeling good, your cholesterol levels were good. I mean, we're doing this false surrogate pursuit all the time. And patients need to start being made aware of that, because you're not getting informed consent. And we're doing the same thing with breasts. We're looking at a mammogram and saying, well, maybe this. We're doing it with lung nodules. We're doing it with PSAs. We're doing it with cholesterol. There was a test question One of my colleagues shared this with me just the other day. They were doing a CME thing, and so they had to take a test. And there was a question about statins causing diabetes. And this is what the American Board of Family Medicine said. Studies support a link between statin. Now, this was after you answered the question right or wrong. You get an explanation so you can get smart. Studies support a link between statin use and the development of diabetes mellitus. A meta-analysis found that statin therapy was associated with an increase with 10% for incident diabetes. Similarly, another meta-analysis found that intensive dose statin therapy was associated with a higher risk, meaning if you raise the dose, you're going to have even more of it. Well, that's common sense. Anyway, in 2012, the FDA modified the package labeling of statins to include the risk of increased blood sugars and the development of type 2 diabetes. They modified their information, and are physicians sharing that? No, they're not. You know that, and I know that. And then they go on, and here's the kicker. However, because now they want to comply, they want to make sure that they don't lose money from Big Pharma, because, you know, as you all know, Big Pharma supplies 75% of the FDA's funding. However, the benefit of statin therapy outweighs the risk. It has been estimated that although the use of statin therapy may cause an additional case of diabetes for every 500 patients treated for 1 year, its use also results in one fewer patient experiencing a cardiovascular event for every 150 patients throughout that same year. Well, they didn't tell us whether that cardiovascular event was death, a heart attack, or maybe you had a palpitation. But the bottom line is they didn't talk about all the other things that Marianne had mentioned. Muscle aches, increased liver enzymes, brain fog, all this. They're not mentioning that. They're saying, oh, the diabetes risk is here and the cardiovascular. But there's a whole plethora of things that happen. Would you comment on that, Marianne?
Yeah, the surrogate endpoint is the core problem with all of this, as you mentioned. And I was talking about this at the MAHA roundtable last week, where we were talking about the weaponization of science and regulatory capture. And medicine has a bad habit of chasing numbers. Get your cholesterol down, get your sugar in particular order. And sometimes the thing that you're chasing is not actually going to provide a meaningful clinical benefit for that patient. And when I was talking about regulatory capture, that our regulatory agencies largely rely on funding from the pharmaceutical industry, the industry that they are supposed to regulate. I noticed that the FDA has 4 expedited pathways now. These expedited pathways are problematic when approving drugs for the market. It's not like a normal license for a drug. They're approved on the basis of a surrogate marker, and it's with the promise that there will be confirmatory trials later down the track to prove that the drug is safe and effective. So they get by with these expedited approvals on smaller trials. They're less robust, they have less safety data. And we know now, looking back at expedited approvals, these drugs are far more likely to be withdrawn from the market, to have safety issues, and to have black box warnings. Now, the problem here is that this surrogate marker, for example, in Alzheimer's, they'll look at amyloid plaques to see if the drug reduces amyloid plaque. And there might be a small reduction in amyloid plaque in the patients that take the drug versus those that don't. But this has no meaningful clinical benefit to the patient. They don't have better cognitive function, they don't feel better. There are other things like brain shrinkage that happens with these Alzheimer's drugs. And so we have a drug on the market that's not making patients better, but it's making the pharmaceutical industry rich. So
why aren't you hearing this? Why aren't you hearing what Marianne DeMasi is writing about? Why do you read New York Times and you hear this one woman named Apoorva who has been off balance on many of them? Why do we do that? So there's several things, but Jeffrey mentioned it in his introductory comments. The name calling, the squashing, the censorship. Just suppress what they're saying, and then you've got it going the right way. And that's what's happened. And I think we're seeing, certainly Big Pharma is powerful. We know that. We know all that. But I think the name calling gets ridiculous. Whether someone says, well, I think you said something about vaccine hesitant, Jeffrey, or something, or in your earlier comments, but I've been called an anti-vaxxer. So I did a video the other day. I held up a bag of M&Ms and said, I like to eat these. And I held up a Snicker bar. And I said, I don't like to eat these. Now, based on that, are you going to call me an anti-chocolate? Then I said, if I go out and I get a polio vaccine and a diphtheria vaccine, but I don't get this one, or this one, isn't it sort of stupid to call me anti-vax? Why don't you just think a little bit? Why don't you just recognize that we can have these kinds of conversations? To me, when I've been ridiculed in the media in Minnesota because I made a comment that I think Bobby Kennedy is asking good questions. And they said, what good questions is he asking? And I said, well, I was in dental school before I went into the seminary, which is what I did before I went into medical school. I took a little bit of a path. But anyway, when I was in dental school, we learned that the best way to get fluoride incorporated to enamel, which we think reduces caries, the best way to do that is direct application.
Yep.
But what we do now is we put it in the water.
Yep.
Bobby Kennedy's saying, is that the best thing we should do? Is fluoride a step along the way towards autism? Maybe not. Maybe it's a fluoride anion or something like that. But we got to ask these questions. Another question, acetaminophen, Tylenol. He's getting ridiculed for his comments about Tylenol and autism. I said, I think it's a legitimate question. When I see a patient with elevated liver enzyme, I ask him two things. How much alcohol are you using? How much Tylenol are you using? Those are my first two questions.
His comments have been widely distorted. There's a big article, again, in the New York Times this morning saying, oh, look, he's dialing back his initial claims about Tylenol. That's not true. His initial claims were very cautious, actually, and his news claims are very cautious. There's been no change in the messaging here. I think we need to turn to the topic of vaccines, if I may. Since World War II, it's been the foundation of all public health, probably, practices, these vaccines. When I was a kid, there were 3 vaccines after the liability shield came in 1986. There was Gold Rush. Now there's so many. I recently read Aaron Seery's book, Vaccines, Amen, which I think is, there's many books on the topic, but that one, how are we doing on time, Lou? Okay. That Aaron Seery's book's the one that have you had a chance to read it yet? It's just a mind-blowing.
Gotten halfway through, I realised that he included his deposition of Stanley Plotkin in there.
That's right.
So I put a pin in it, and then I went back and I read the 9-hour deposition.
You read the whole deposition.
I'm about to.
This book is absolutely terrifying, but and our friend Martin Kulldorff often says this. He says, the biggest creator of anti-vaxxers was the COVID vaccine. Once you start mandating something that people don't feel like they need, that don't feel good about the safety profile or the effectiveness, and you're required to get it anyway at the penalty of losing your job, you're going to turn into an anti-vaxxer, right? So, but something is changing in the world of vaccines in terms of compliance. There's virtually zero uptake for the latest booster, which I don't know what number we're on now, but people are not getting it. And now, again, I keep talking about the New York Times, but they ran an article, Panic, that people don't want to get their pets vaccinated anymore because they're concerned about the incidence of pautism.
Autism?
I thought that was pretty clever. But look, things are changing. Things are changing. People are now alert, they're awake, they're asking profound questions, and that, quite frankly, has got an entire industry, arguably maybe the most powerful industry in the world, in a state of panic.
Yeah, I think the new ASIP panel, the CDC advisory panel, has sent the media into a panic.
Yeah, total panic. Yeah.
There are many robust questions that are being asked during these panel sessions. As you mentioned in your opening statement,
yeah.
It's they characterize it as chaos, but it's robust, and they're asking the questions that we're all asking, and this is something that we haven't witnessed before. So it's a really exciting time. And,
exciting is one way to put it.
Yeah, I find it a
But I think that's exactly right. It is really an exciting time. People are asking why. And this impacted deeply on not just COVID vaccines, all of the vaccines.
Yep.
And I think we saw the Cleveland Clinic come out, the 24, 25 flu vaccine. I mean, the Cleveland Clinic, a highly regarded clinic, came out and said the vaccine efficacy was negative 27%. That if you took the flu vaccine in 24 and 25, you actually had a 26% greater chance of getting the flu. So, I mean, this is astonishing.
And there was a new study that was just released. It was from 2019 of Spain that looked into 2 different pneumonia vaccines. They came up with 24% negative efficacy and 80%.
We have a job here, all of us collectively gathered together. If you look at 1 Corinthians, Paul makes a comment that if we don't do this or don't successfully love others, we're just noise in the wind. We're just empty gong. And I really think that we have to be the healers. Somehow we have to move forward. And I think the first start is to ask the question, why? Why did it happen over the last 5 years that all of a sudden Jeffrey and Marianne were being squashed? And I think it was because people were scared. It was uncharted territory. It wasn't because people wanted to wake up in the morning and say stupid things or do stupid things. I mean, to me, the ultimate is riding down the road in a convertible with the top down and wearing a mask. I mean, it's just, wow. But I think we need to ask why, and then we have to say, and I think it was because people were scared. Now, there are some, I think, that were bad actors, and they do need to be investigated. But for the everyday common person, we need to talk about what happened. And again, one of my challenges in running for governor is I need to remind people about those dark days. But if I do it in too blunt a way, it just makes them feel bad. They feel guilty. They feel like they were stupid. They feel like they had their grandchild take a vaccine that they wish they'd never taken. All of those things happen. So somehow there's got to be a spirit of charity. Yeah. This could happen to any of us.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, again, if you look at Ed Dowd's comments, he will show that if you look between 45 and 55-year-old people, prior to 2020, in America, about 150,000 of them died every year. But it boomed up to 200,000 in 2021.
Oh, it's Leslie. Leslie, go ahead. And then we have to move on to Walter. Go ahead, Leslie. Oh, sorry. I just thought you were interrupting.
When we look at those numbers, that's how we get people to rethink about this. They say, oh, what happened in not 2020, but 2021? We have to do this. We have to stop the ranting, and we have to start the healing. And I think if we're not doing that, then we potentially are guilty of just being noise.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, something that I think is really important is a shift that's happened in the last few decades, and that's a reframing of public health into our personal health and personal lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's outrageously wrong. But I wanted to understand and ask both Marianne and Scott, you've been talking about certain drugs, statins, procedures, mammograms, and things under the rubric of public health. Please help me understand.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, why are we deeming those very personal and private medical interventions somehow a public health issue? You talked about it as public health.
Oh, yeah.
I just think this is a really dangerous, this is something, if we want to shift this conversation, then we need to actually really be conscious of what we're saying. And I think that when we talk about those kinds of private medical matters in the context of public health, then we're opening up problems. Whereas I personally want us to reframe it as commons, right? Sanitation. Yeah. That's what saved us in the 20th century was public health measures. And
well, that was the original definition of public health back in the late 19th
and
century. It was about the commons. It wasn't about mammograms. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I do think we need to move on to Walter, but I'd like to thank Dr. Jensen and also Marianne DeMasi. So, thank you both. Okay. What time is it? Okay. Wow, that went fast, didn't it? Okay. So, does everybody know Walter Cronkite? Does he need an introduction? No. Founder of County Highway, one of the nation's greatest cultural critics and screenwriters and novelists, and with a new book out on, what's it? It's the new book.
It's coming out next year. called Homesick. It's about.
Oh no, but the most recent book about
Up in the Air.
Well, Up in the Air is great, but the one.
Blood Will Out.
Blood Will Out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Walter Kern.
Yeah.
Please come on up.
So one time I was asked, what is the Brownstone Institute? I said it is a open-air activist monastery. Because I was thinking back to one of the most effective social movements and sort of secret organizations in the history of mankind, the Jesuits. And they formed, in Spain as a group that had some problems with the main church and so on, and they have now become the chief intelligence underground influencer of human events, according to those who don't believe it's the Freemasons. But my hope is that we'll grow into at least one of these two organizations, either the Jesuits or the Freemasons. And to do that, we're going to have to get a hold over the human mind. And not just the rational part of the human mind. I come from the cultural wing of our monastery, the part that is concerned with storytelling, narratives, symbolism, Jungian psychology, mass psychology, and so on. And for this movement to really work, we're going to have to grab the unconscious mind. We can have documentaries, we can have hearings, we can have white papers, we can have studies until the end of time. But we will only have penetrated the outer perimeter of the hugely defended human mind. The only way to get inside is to get into the subconscious. Now, I think everybody would agree here that you don't know a subject, you haven't learned a subject until it enters your dreams. You're not a writer until you start having dreams about writing. You're not a college student until you start having dreams about going to exams without your pants on. Until a subject, until an experience has reintegrated itself or integrated itself for the first time at the dream level, it hasn't happened for the human self. Is that happening with what I call the COVID epic? Is it integrating itself as an experience into the cultural and personal subconscious of people properly? And I'll use an example. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. When was the first anti-Vietnam War movie? Came about 3 years later. And it was, in some ways, not an anti-war movie, in some ways a very powerful one, The Deer Hunter, 1978. Told the story of, small-town Pennsylvania kids who go off to the Vietnam War and are horrified, scarified, destroyed. 1979 was Apocalypse Now. So at approximately the same distance from the end of the Vietnam War as we are from the end of COVID, if the damn thing is ever allowed to end, they started processing that experience in the group dream layer of America. Is that happening with COVID? Well, I will stipulate that it might be about to happen, but it has not. We've had one movie, this movie Editing, which had a tiny COVID plot, which was neither here nor there, frankly, and the whole movie was about those crazy people out in the desert. And it did not, I think, cause much change in the conversation, but there was a lot of hunger for it. When people saw it, they were like, oh my gosh, my actual experience being reflected by Hollywood. Not, a battle between superheroes or something that's occurring in a medieval fantasy world or a futuristic science fiction realm. Now, as the person who has written, and I will hold this out as absolute, indisputable gospel, the definitive film version of our COVID experience, a movie I call The Rash, and which was commissioned by Nicole Shanahan, and which I wrote over the year of the election, I can tell you how we can convert this experience into a dream that will be a good vaccine in the sense that it will inoculate us against future operations like COVID. Because until you've laughed at a tragedy, until you've seen satirized what you took seriously, or at least your neighbors did, you haven't really mastered it. You cannot be fooled again if you have laughed at the same moves being made on screen. If you have seen the equivalent of Dr. Fauci, played by a great actor, with all the vanity and all the, ridiculous geriatric sex appeal, allegedly. You have not really, and I'm talking about my movie now, you have not really appreciated the way that pharma profits and perhaps even helps originate certain diseases unless you have seen the drug Zenvidia, which I invented, used to treat this rash, which I invented. Why did I substitute a rash for COVID? Because a respiratory illness is not cinematic. It's only acoustic. It comes with a lot of coughing, maybe, clearing of the throat. A rash, however, is a cinematic disease. And not only that, the behavior around a rash is very cinematic because there is nothing funnier than watching people scratch themselves. In fact, one of the opening scenes of the movie is dinner, an academic dinner at a Stanford-like university, Crawford University. I really made it unidentifiable. Yeah, at which a Fauci-like character is giving a speech on scientific research and science itself, the new religion, as people in the audience secretly are going like this and getting up to go to the bathroom. Only funnier than seeing people scratch themselves is seeing people want to scratch themselves but not do it. So I converted COVID into this other skin condition, and I had to come up with a drug. And I couldn't use the word vaccine. One thing that I realized early writing a screenplay is that the word vaccine causes an immune response. And so the idea of this movie, if you understand how vaccines work, is to act as an adjuvant and get the message into the immune system, into the body, without it being rejected. So Zenvidia, the drug that I invented, for the rash that I invented, is a repurposed psych drug, which has been sitting on the shelf for years, not performing, despite its ads showing people in hammocks looking up at shooting stars. It's a psych drug that hasn't caught on because it has only really two effects. One, it's extremely addictive. People who take Zenvidia just want to take it again. Secondly, it causes apathy and lack of verbal acuity. It basically causes brain fog, okay? And so without any use for this drug, it just sort of sat there. People don't necessarily want to be dumb and, wanting more Zenvidia all the time. But its application to the rash, the president of the company realizes, is that though it doesn't stop the itch, it makes you not care about scratching it. So in the movie, the way the company gets Zenvidia approved and into the hands of all, the Americans around this university, which is my microcosm, is by reformulating it as an inhalable drug. They put it in inhalers, so that the moment you want to itch, you puff instead. Suddenly you don't care. You also don't care about your driving, what your wife is saying, that you were just diagnosed with cancer. But what I did was I took all of the things that COVID and the vaccine are accused of doing to the human mind, making it foggy, making it apathetic, making, people into a zombie-like compliant population, and I actually put it on screen. We get to see them go from engaged, normal people to whatever I was saying, like that. We watch them lose their verbal skills. We watch them lose their reasoning skills. We watch them lose their ability to think critically. That's what a movie does. It turns an experience into a dream. In every other respect, converting COVID into a movie was a problem or a question of taking something that people thought they knew and had already been programmed to believe something about and alienating it, twisting it, turning it in a new direction so that people would laugh. For example, ZenVidya has there's a lockdown similar to COVID. And the movie stars of Hollywood get together, as they did during COVID, remember, to sing Imagine? Does anybody remember that horrible, surreal episode when they all pretended to be locked up in their bathrooms singing, 3 words of Imagine? In this movie, they sing the praises of ZenVidya, the age of ZenVidya, to the song The Age of Aquarius. And you even, do you remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger came out and said, F your freedom? F your freedom. Well, in my movie, the similarly named Germanic action star, smoking a cigar in his hot tub, makes a similar claim for those who would reject ZenVidya. You want to be smart, or do you want not to itch? So I converted all these terms, and the idea was that we would experience COVID without using the word COVID, without using the vaccine, without any of the immune responses that were programmed into us. Now, I won't go more deeply into the plot of the movie except to say that there was another aspect to COVID which I think was more important than the virus itself, whatever that virus was, however it was engineered and wherever it came from. And that was the gain of function storytelling that went with COVID. To break off from my movie to their movie. Have you ever suspected that just as there is a lab somewhere which is, breeding and splicing these viruses, there is a lab somewhere full of storytellers, full of screenwriters who are saying, now how are we going to do this COVID thing? I need ideas. And somebody said, let's start it with movies from China, grainy movies, surveillance footage, because people believe surveillance footage, of people walking along through train stations and then falling down on their faces. That will be the beginning. That'll be the foreshadowing. Okay, that's good. What next? I know. A ship full of COVID victims is steaming toward the coast of America. Its name is the Diamond Princess. Like the plague ships, I've done some research. I looked up the plague, and I found out there was a term called plague ships. These were ships thought to be carrying plague victims that would be kept out of ports. The Diamond Princess is our plague ship. Okay, well, we've got the foreshadowing, we've got the plague ship, we've got the suspense. What do we need now? 2 things. We need a celebrity victim. It can't just be faceless people in China. It can't just be the, locked up passengers on this cruise ship. That won't get young people to relate. They'll hope the cruise ship population dies. Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks. We can show him not only concerned to be infected, but happy to be quarantined. Happy to be quarantined with his wife. Perfect. In Australia, where none of our laws will be broken, where we can set up a model of what we want to do in the United States ahead of time. Okay, what do we need now? We got the celebrity victim, we've got the plague ship, we've got the coming storm. We need a hero. Well, there was one waiting in the wings. And I will tell you that in every instance during COVID, just like the plague ship and the Diamond Princess are the same thing, there is a earlier version from the history of storytelling. And many of you who don't have the literary education I do might not know this term, commedia dell'arte. Commedia dell'arte was a very stylized form of European theater in the Middle Ages, in which a troupe of 5 people, kind of like what they call a Punch and Judy show now, would go from town to town and stage these sort of morality plays and these comedies. And the peasants, not being literate, would expect the same set of characters every time. And the pillar of the Commedia dell'arte troupe was a comic character called Il Dottore, the doctor. And the doctor had certain characteristics that everybody who went to these shows expected. Number one, he wore a mask. It was often a plague mask, one of those weird beak-like, masks full of perfumed cotton or something. Number two, he loved to hear himself speak. The essence of the Il Dottore character was proclaiming and expounding. And he had another characteristic, which was that he was lecherous. Though he was aged, he believed himself to be one of the sexiest people alive. And any Il Dottore performance included that, him looking at the bottom of the young woman. He often interfered in the courtship of the young couple because he believed he was a better match for the young woman than, the young prince or whatever. Well, so who could play Il Dottore in the COVID? Well, there was a man who was very convinced he was of Italian heritage, that he too was at 78, an incredibly attractive person despite being 4'9", and he volunteered to play the hero in the COVID drama. My point is that COVID, to a storyteller like me, non-scientist, despite having a father who was, and coming from a medical family, transparently fake from the beginning, because it followed a script that was so absolutely classical and whose tropes were so worn out that I knew wherever this virus came from, and whether it came from governments or, secret chambers of our intelligence or military communities, the story certainly did. And once I saw through the story, the rest of it was a bit like watching a film that you've seen before with a new girlfriend, where you say, I know what's going to happen next. Unfortunately, that was my wife, and she didn't believe that this analysis of this spreading pandemic was accurate. I mean, people were dying, right? I mean, the hospitals were full, right? How is my very, superficial, supercilious husband predicting that this is all, in some fashion, a scam based on his English literature degree? My final point, I've only got till a minute here, is that insofar as COVID was a drama, and it was, I hope I've proved that, and insofar as it would the uptake of the entire COVID experience would never have been guaranteed without the storytelling elements that I've described. The only way to inoculate against the future pandemic is another drama. You can only fight drama with drama. You cannot fight it with statistics. You cannot fight it, You can, but finally, all of those arguments only reach, as I say, the outer perimeter of the castle. They don't get across the moat. The moat is what guards the subconscious. And when people who think they're going to a movie about, I don't know, a college campus that goes mad during the outbreak of a rash, and a professor who stands up against it based on our friend Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who I interviewed for 10 hours after thinking I was going to have a 2-hour lunch with him. And I came away and I said, well, I've got a hero, I've got a setting, I've got a disease, I've got a drug, a fake drug that doesn't work, I've got movie stars, and I've even got a governor of California who is running for president. I've covered it all. And if I can get people to laugh at each one of these elements, or any of them, and then if I can get them to have a feeling in the pit of their stomach that everybody's being had by these mad characters, and if I can get them to look at somebody who's just taken Zenvidya, the president of a university, said, excuse me, and then suddenly is at a loss for words and steps off Biden-like the edge of the stage, I have then inoculated them against the entirety of this operation happening again. They'll have to do a new one. I'll take one question in case my watch is early.
I've got 2 words. Kubrick, Strangelove.
What is it?
Stanley Kubrick, Dr. Strangelove.
Exactly. So Dr. Malone has put his finger on it. Was anyone ever able, after seeing Dr. Strangelove, to believe that the strategic nuclear forces of the American and Soviet Union were under the control of rational beings? There was at least the possibility they weren't, and at least the possibility that the entire doctrine of mutual assured destruction maybe had some weak points. I don't know why, and it really troubles me that Catherine Bigelow, who gave us the director who gave us the orthodox version of the bin Laden raid, which I can tell you as a journalist has some holes in it, is now setting America aflame with a movie about a rogue nuclear weapon that's headed our way. That, because she is, as you would say in Hollywood, a made woman, I wonder what the message of all that's going to be. But Dr. Boone's absolutely right. Stanley Kubrick in Dr. Strangelove inoculated us against the belief that Henry Kissinger, Robert McNamara, etc., were all sane people. But he even went further in that movie, Eyes Wide Shut, in which he portrayed our entire elite as a cavorting, sex-obsessed secret society that met in strange mansions for rituals unholy and perhaps deadly, and then went out in public and masqueraded as our leadership class. That was an even more devastating blow to people's ability to take seriously those who posture as our elites.
Walter, can I give you one little pearl that might help you with the implementation of your script? The culture portrayed in Strangelove.
Behind what?
The culture portrayed in Strangelove.
Yes.
Is mirrored almost precisely in the biowarfare culture. The biodefense culture, the mindsets there and the dynamics are almost identical to what I've seen in my travels through the biodefense world. So if you can incorporate that kind of bizarre madness that was portrayed in Strangelove as part of what's driving this, you'll have captured essence that transcends just, Fauci as the clown. Fauci is the clown, is a representative of a culture. And that culture is actually fairly broad and well embedded into national security, intelligence, HHS, DOD, and it is almost precisely the same culture that Kubrick lampooned in Strangelove.
Okay, I'm taking that note very seriously because there is an element of that in the movie that could be strengthened, and so you've helped me immeasurably. The great satirical and yet terrifying point of Strangelove was that these people think it's survivable. Remember at the end where Peter Sellers says, well, if we go down into the tunnels, if we go down into the, the missile silos, if we go deep enough and we have enough breeding pairs, we can come back out in 70 years without a scratch on us. And I think it's that hubris and that belief that the weaponry is terrible, but the wars are survivable. And there's still an advantage to be had. That was the takeaway from Strangelove that I think caused so many people to be sick to their stomachs and very alert. And if I don't mistake what you're saying, and we'll talk about it, that exists in the biowarfare. Well, we could probably take out 15 million, and it wouldn't spread beyond the next 20, and they wouldn't actually die. They'd just be very compromised. So let's do it. They're going to do it to us. And anyway, we need fewer people. It will only take out the weak. Those kinds of conversations that Stanley Kubrick had happen in the Situation Room in Strangelove, I think, were the dramatic center of the movie. And such madness applying to the biowarfare community should be, should be considered. The last thing I'll say is that, during COVID, they didn't make movies about COVID. You know why? Because they couldn't make movies. They locked down everything. So they had to make all their movies about COVID before COVID, like Contagion. They had to make all their movies about the heroic nature of pandemic fighting before, but during the Vietnam War, they were able to make the Green Berets, John Wayne, There were a lot of movies during the Vietnam War that made it out to be an incredibly heroic exercise. I just hope that those of us who think there will be Nuremberg trials or hope for justice will realize that can't happen without a cultural shift. The deep unconscious pressure that would drive that accountability push has to come from the whole of people. It has to come from levels of disgust, horror, laughter, and so on. And we have to implant that. We have to implant that message first. Secondly, and lastly, we can have in a movie the justice that we crave and fear will not appear in real life. So I won't tell you what happens when the entirety of the underground population of experimented on animals gets loose on the Stanford campus. But it's something you'd all love to see, I think. Oh, yeah.